In light of this post from Oprah over the weekend, I think it's time to talk about the creator of the little black dress, fashion revolutionary, bisexual socialite, and Nazi spy, Coco Chanel. Welcome back to Yesterqueers. My name's Amanda, and I'm a public historian of queer history. Gabrielle Chanel, known to the world as Coco, is one of the first, if not the first, influencers. She is the literal inspiration for the 20th century idea of a modern woman, and she changed the entire landscape of women's fashion, at least in the West, several times over the course of her long career. One of her most famous quotes is that a girl should be two things: who and what she wants. She told a variety of different stories about her origins, but the truth is that Chanel was born to poverty in Western France on August 19, 1883. She was the second of 6 children born to a street vendor named Albert and a laundress named Jeanne. Her legal name was actually Gabrielle Chanel because it was spelled wrong when her birth was recorded, but she never corrected it because to do so would have revealed that Coco Chanel was born in a charity hospital. Her mother died when she was 11, and Chanel and her 2 sisters were sent to the convent orphanage at Aubezine, which is where she learned to sew and to speak French. Although it was the national language at the time, French was spoken mostly in the cities, and Chanel grew up speaking a local provincial patois. When she aged out of the orphanage at 18, Chanel moved to a boarding house for Catholic girls in Moulins and took work as a seamstress. At night, she worked for tips as a poseuse, entertainers who kept the audience warm between the main acts, at a cabaret called La Rotonde. Chanel often said that Coco was a nickname her father gave her, but in fact it was the stage name that she took while performing at La Rotonde. Chanel was not a talented enough singer to pursue a career on the stage, but fortunately, in 1906, she caught the eye of an ex-cavalry officer and industrialist named Etienne Balsan and quickly became his second mistress, joining famed courtesan Emilienne d'Alençon in a sort of triad. The 3 of them lived together at Balsan's estate for several years, and it seems that Chanel and Emilienne had a romantic and sexual relationship with each other as well as with Etienne. It is also very likely that Chanel's nephew, André, was actually her son with Etienne Balsan. Life at the estate was luxurious and decadent, and Etienne showered Chanel with jewels and clothes and introduced her to a wealthy and hedonistic social circle. But she soon got tired of the life of ease, and once she'd mastered Etienne's favorite hobbies of horsemanship and hunting, she started making hats to occupy her time. Apparently, she still had some time on her hands because in 1908, she started what would be a decade-long affair with one of Etienne's friends and probably the love of her life, Albert Capel, a wealthy English polo player who did eventually marry but was still described in his 1919 obituary as the dashing lover and sponsor of the fashion designer Coco Chanel. And indeed, he was both of those things. He put her up in an apartment in Paris, and once Chanel became a licensed milliner, he paid for her to open her first boutique, a Parisian hat shop, as well as her first 2 clothing stores, which were in the seaside resort towns of Deauville and Biarritz. Capel's style influenced Chanel's first forays into adapting menswear silhouettes for women's clothes, and the iconic shape of the Chanel No. 5 bottle is either inspired by the glass toiletry bottles with which he traveled, or by the whiskey decanter that Capel favored. I have to skip over a lot here, but from 1908 to 1930, thanks to a combination of relentless determination, impeccable design sense, famous friends, and wealthy lovers, Chanel went from a part-time hobbyist milliner to a full-time couturier who established her house of couture at 31 Rue Cambon in Paris, where it remains to this day. By the 1920s, Chanel was also traveling in the highest echelons of French and British society, including having a decade-long affair with the Duke of Westminster, and possibly having a, quote, great romantic moment with Edward VIII, the Prince of Wales. This is also where we start to see the first hints of her homophobia and antisemitism, because the Duke of Westminster was an unapologetic bigot. Yes, Coco Chanel was a bisexual woman and a homophobe. She seems to have had no problem with women sleeping with each other, but she loathed gay men, especially the ones who worked in the fashion industry. She once said in an interview, "I have seen young women ruined by these awful queers, drugs, divorce, scandal. They will use any means to destroy a competitor and to wreak vengeance on a woman. The queers want to be women, but they are lousy women." By 1935, 52-year-old Coco Chanel was the unrivaled queen of haute couture, and the House of Chanel employed 4,000 women. When she started to be eclipsed by Elsa Schiaparelli's more playful designs at the end of the 1930s, their rivalry became the stuff of legend. At one particularly dramatic costume ball in 1938, Vogue editor Bettina Ballard wrote in her diary, "There was a near disaster when Chanel dared Schiaparelli to dance with her and, with purposeful innocence, steered Schiaparelli directly into the candles. The fire was put out, and so was Schiaparelli, by delighted guests squirting her with soda water." Chanel's reign ended in 1939 with the start of World War II. Though other designers like Dior kept their houses open, even during the occupation, Coco abruptly closed the House of Chanel and put almost all 4,000 of her employees out of work. She only kept on a handful of shop girls to continue to sell perfume and jewelry out of the storefront on Rue Cambon. She claimed that she ceased operations because war was no time for fashion, but she made the first part of her fortune selling resort wear during World War I, so clearly she wasn't morally opposed to it. It's much more likely that Chanel used the war as an excuse to retaliate against her employees, all of whom had participated in France's general strike in 1936 and won themselves higher wages and better working conditions. She fled Paris briefly, but returned after the German occupation to live at the Hotel Ritz, the preferred residence for high-ranking German officials, with her lover, Baron Hans Günther von Dinklage, who had traveled in Chanel's social circles for years. Prior to the war, Dinklage played the role of a German expat who was seeking refuge from the Nazis in France, but in reality, he was a secret agent for the Reich's propaganda arm. Dinklage worked directly for Goebbels, and Chanel worked directly for him. Biographers, historians, and the House of Chanel have tried for decades to smooth over the war years in Chanel's personal story, trying to paint her as a woman just trying to survive, as an aunt or mother trying to save her nephew or son from a German prison camp, or as a victim of Nazi machinations. But in 2014, French intelligence agencies declassified and released documents that show Chanel's direct involvement in the Nazi plot to gain control of Madrid. Coco Chanel was not a victim or a passive observer. She was a registered agent of the Third Reich, actively working for the advancement of the Nazis. During the Nazi occupation of France, she also tried to use Germany's seizure of Jewish-owned businesses to regain full control of Chanel No. 5, her antisemitism having convinced her that the Jewish partners in her perfume business, Pierre and Paul Wertheimer, were stealing money from her. They weren't, and they'd anticipated that Chanel might try something like this. So before they fled to the US, they signed the company over to a Frenchman named Felix Amiot, and he ran it during the war. Chanel couldn't touch it. Chanel's sympathies were well known, and after the war, she was questioned by the Free French Purge Committee, but they didn't have enough evidence to stand up to Winston Churchill's request that she be released, so she was. Most historians believe that Churchill intervened to prevent Chanel from giving testimony that would have revealed high-ranking British officials or members of the British royal family as Nazi sympathizers. Chanel lived in Switzerland for many years after the war, continuing her affair with Dinklage. She returned to Paris in 1954 at age 71 to reopen the House of Chanel, motivated in part by her hatred of the illogical designs that constrain the female form, favored by designers like Dior and Balenciaga. Fun fact, she needed Pierre Wertheimer's financial support to reopen the House of Chanel. He agreed in exchange for the rights to all of Chanel's products, not just the perfume. Pierre's grandsons own and operate Chanel today. The French press was exceedingly cautious about Chanel's comeback given the rumors about her sympathies during the war, but the US and British press went wild. Chanel's old friend Bettina Ballard featured the collection in the February 1954 issue of US Vogue, and just like that, Chanel was back on top. She continued working, designing every collection herself until her death. Coco Chanel died on January 10, 1971 at the Ritz after returning from a drive with a friend. It's said that she laid down on her bed and looked at her maid and said, "You see, this is how you die." She was 87 years old. That's it for today. As always, more information, including sources and further reading, is available in the usual place.